It is a time of huge global uncertainty, wrecking ball politics, according to this year's Munich security report, which it's feared could end up benefiting the few, while it says leaving a world of rubble for the many. Extreme humanitarian crisis, rising instability, and a growing sense of helplessness. I spoke to the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights about why people remain at the heart of its mission. I want to ask you first what you made of Marco Rubio's speech earlier today, because he sort of took aim at the United Nations. He said it hasn't had a role in solving any of the world's crises. He said that that was credited to American leadership. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. The United Nations is the multilateral institution that has provided not only peace and security and development and humanitarian assistance and human rights, and in its history, we have prevented not only conflicts, we have prevented a third world war, but we have also provided comfort to millions and millions of people who are in need of protection, people who are refugees, who are internally displaced. And we have created an incredibly important normative framework, human rights, which is a compass, a legal compass, a moral compass to look at the world. So when we hear these things about peace and security and the UN hasn't resolved any conflicts, I have to say it depends precisely on those countries that criticize us, because they are a member of the United Nations and they are a member of the Security Council. It's also upon them to provide the leadership that is required. We are not talking about the UN as if it's something separate from member states. It is the national ownership that we need from each and every country to make the United Nations work. And we are a lifeline to millions of people every day.
Of course. There is consensus, I guess, within the UN itself that there are improvements that can be made. There are reforms that can be made. But does it come down to a lack of cohesion? Does it come down to a lack of trust? Does it come down to spreading itself too thinly, as has been suggested here in Munich? I mean, what is the root cause of some people's uncertainty at the moment towards the organisation?
So the legitimacy of the United Nations is absolutely clear. Let's not forget, 193 member states, they are all having the power to convene, to discuss, to challenge each other. We need that convening space, especially at a time when everything is so polarized. But we also need on a daily basis the type of work that the UN is doing on the ground. My office, for example, we have teams everywhere to document human rights violations, to report about them, to make sure that the world puts the spotlight on crises that are otherwise forgotten. And development. Development is part of the future. If we had not investment in development, we would actually see a much worse world today. What it needs is a recommitment to the principles, to the values of the United Nations Charter, and not the fashionable bashing that we have seen of late. I mean, all those who challenge us, they should come up with the ideas and help us do better, all of us together, because it's not us versus them, it's all of us. The United Nations belongs to all of us.
We are a week away from the first meeting of Donald Trump's peace board about the future of Gaza. What do you hope to see from that meeting, and what for you does the future look like?
We need a very clear commitment that there is Palestinian participation in the governance of Gaza, that there is not only lip service to peace, that we see a stop to the fighting, that we see full humanitarian assistance coming in so that people can finally recover. It's still not enough. That we have the possibility of those who need to evacuate for medical reasons, that they are able to do so, and that we finally give credence to and a real commitment to the self-determination of the Palestinian people. That's what I would expect coming out of this.
But many people will find it very hard to listen to talk, for example, of the reconstruction of Gaza when there is such a pressing and immediate humanitarian crisis still going on.
So reconstruction is never a logistical exercise. And all those who think that you can just build up something new without actually dealing with what's been happening and the trauma that people have gone through, the mental anguish. I mean, the children that weren't able to go to school, that have seen their parents die or their brothers or sisters die, or the women. We have, I don't know how many thousands of orphans now living in Gaza. The women who have lost their husbands or who saw their sisters killed. That is extremely important, that there is a way to not only deal with that incredible trauma, but that they are also heard and listened to what happened to them. And so there is an enormous amount of work to be done. But of course there are the physical needs, there are the material needs, but there are also, frankly, the mental and psychological needs. And actually to be able to see a future for themselves. I mean, if you deny the future to anyone who lives in these circumstances, I mean, what life is this? So we need to really work that there is a future, a vision for the future that Palestinians can have.
And on that point, during your time here in Munich, what sort of pressure have you put on world leaders, be it from the US, be it from Europe, Asia, beyond? What have you told them needs to be done when it comes to pressure, for example, on Israel moving forward?
So our message is loud and clear. And that message is exercise your influence, that there is a peaceful solution not only to Gaza, but also to the West Bank, and that there is an end of the occupation, and that there is a realization of the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. That's where the pressure needs to lie. Because of course we see what's happening on the humanitarian front, but we should never lose sight of finding a viable way forward, which is, of course, the two-state solution. We must never give up on this.
Let me ask you about Ukraine, because people living in Ukraine are still experiencing an extremely brutal winter. They are tired of talking, they are tired of summits. And yet Zelensky says the US all too often is asking for concessions from Ukraine and not from Russia. Is the reality not tough enough already to warrant that?
Look, I feel for the Ukrainians. I remember when I went to Kiev in December 22. It was a winter about minus 10 degrees. Today we know that the winter has been particularly harsh in Ukraine. If if all the critical infrastructure gets constantly bombarded, it means there's hardly any electricity. My own staff work sometimes without electricity in the middle of, the day or the night. Sometimes they don't have heating. I just think of people with disabilities. I think of older people who can't perhaps have mobility issues. I mean, how are they surviving in these circumstances? We don't talk enough about the indirect consequences of war. So obviously there needs to be a peace, but it has to be a peace that is negotiated by both sides. But it's based on the human rights of the people of Ukraine and their right of territorial integrity and sovereignty and independence.
You said here in Munich, the United Nations is monitoring the situation in Iran. Just in the last 24 hours, we've seen Donald Trump move another military carrier to the Middle East. What exactly are you monitoring, and what is your response to increasing military threats to push for negotiation?
So the human rights situation is disastrous. I mean, we have been not only hearing about thousands of people killed. We don't have the exact number, but it is in the very high thousands. So we don't, as I said, we don't know how many exactly. The repression was severe. The repression was brutal. It was cruel. We have heard of detentions. We hear different stories about whether or not the death penalty will be applied. But we are worried because when there are contradictory statements, you never know what actually is going to happen. We have also heard about people disappearing. So yes, the human rights situation is absolutely horrific and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed in the negotiations that are taking place. It cannot just be about nuclear. The human rights situation also has to come in. And we do not believe in military action that is not in line with the United Nations Charter. Because the Charter is very clear about the use of force. It has to be authorized by the Security Council or it's an act of self-defense. Otherwise, military action is not permitted under the Charter.
We could go on to talk about many of the other crises which are ongoing at the moment, but lastly, I want to ask you, people across the world increasingly feel a sense, according to this year's report, of helplessness. They feel the rich and powerful are only getting richer. The richest 1% gained 41% of all new wealth. Only 1% went to the bottom 50%. You know, how do you address that? How do you go about addressing those concerns, that rising feeling that the world is getting worse? And it's not just about crises, wars, it's also about the cost of living, the rising prices, people just feeling like they're really struggling at the moment.
So it is extremely important for all of us to feel that we are agents of our own fate. And human rights is a compass for that. It's a moral compass, it's a legal compass, but it is also what we have achieved and won, sometimes at a huge struggle. I mean, the battle for human rights has lasted for centuries. Feminism, anti-apartheid, anti-slavery, anti-racism, the labor movement. We need to be aware that we are endowed with dignity and rights, that every human being is equal in dignity and rights for everyone, everywhere, and that's a huge promise. It's a promise that we need not to cast away, but to really live on a daily basis, and that gives us power, that empowers us to not only fight for our rights, but also fight for the rights of others. There's also a duty that we have to all the communities that are currently affected by conflict. And I want to pass that message of hope, because I've seen so many young people. I was in Sudan. I saw the young people who are suffering enormously, but they have an incredible, indomitable spirit of resilience and strength and courage, and they want to carry on.
We've seen that as well with the Ukrainian people.
You see it with the Ukrainian people, you see it with the Palestinians, you see it in all of these situations. So I want to provide that hope that actually, based on what we have achieved, we can meet these challenges. But I also hope that there's more mobilization for other people, there's more solidarity for other people, that there is also more ideas about climate change and how we fight climate change, especially for young people. I often think of young people and their future, and we need to fight for it on a daily basis, but also on the digital side. We need to be aware of the risks and the dangers while we embrace the incredible opportunities that they represent. So yes, I think we can do it if we master the resilience and the strength in ourselves. People should not feel powerless. We have seen how struggles for freedom and justice have worked in the past, and they will work and continue to work.
High Commissioner, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.